Hello, everybody. Glad you were able to make it tonight. We're going to continue our discussion on mental health. So, if you're on or about to get on, let me know that you're there, that you're able to see and hear me so that I can know that everything is working fine. Hey, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well. We're going to continue our mental health forum tonight. And we're speaking about, tonight, we're going to be focusing on post traumatic stress disorder. We're really going to talk about that topic specifically and what it entails, the diagnoses of that, the difficulties in diagnosing that, or some things that occur when it is diagnosed, some of the challenges, conditions that can exist together with that, and coping strategies. So, God bless you all. I see Patricia, uh, Vilma, Melody, Eddie. God bless you all. I hope you guys are doing well. So, just let me know if you're able to both see and hear me clearly, and if you're able to see what I wrote in the chat. It should be above what you guys have written there, so we could all be on the same page here. So as people log on, I'll give a couple of minutes for everybody to start logging in and joining our page here. So I hope everybody is doing well. Um, as I said before, we're really going to be focusing on post-traumatic stress disorder tonight, and it's going to be all about the disorder itself. Last week we spoke about post-traumatic stress in general. Tonight we're going to focus on the disorder itself, on the diagnosis of the disorder, and what that entails. So I'll give everybody a minute to log in. Thank you guys for being here today. Hey Carmen, good to see you there. Hope you guys are doing well and feeling well. So I'm fighting a spring cold, I guess you would call it. I sat outside on the weekend a little bit, and I think my throat got a little chill, but no big deal. So if I start coughing, I got some cough drops here, and I got some water just in case. Don't worry, you will not catch a computer virus from me, or I hope you won't. In any case, so keep on logging in. I see about 6 people logged in right now, 7 now. So hope you guys are doing well. And we're going to continue our discussion of mental health in general. And really what we're going to focus on today, as I already said, is post-traumatic stress disorder and what that entails, what that looks like. So again, I'll give a couple of more seconds for people to come in. And of course, later on, I'll be asking for you guys to give me your opinion or your take on some of the things that we're talking about, what they mean to you in your life in general, of course, and how we can continue this in the future. Most likely next week will be our last session. Take a break, and then we will go on from there. So God bless you all again. So let's start. Post-traumatic stress disorder. First of all, how many of you have heard of post-traumatic stress disorder? And what do you know about it? So you can just post there in the chat. What have you heard about post-traumatic stress disorder? Not post-traumatic stress, but the disorder itself. Hey, Jenny, good to see you there. Hey, Olga, God bless you. Post-traumatic stress disorder. What do you know about it, and what have you heard about it? So you got to be posting in the chat here, so that I can know that you're on, not on the not on Messenger. So I know you're here on the Facebook itself, chatting on the Facebook. I don't want to be looking on my phone while talking to you guys here. I think that's not good on my part. What do you know about post-traumatic stress disorder, or what have you heard about post-traumatic stress disorder? Okay, so Michelle has heard about it, and what about it? What do you think about it? What do you know about it? What does it mean to you? Okay, Eddie says, as ex-military, I've come across certain people with the disorder. Yes, thank you. And this is particularly a disorder that is found in veterans, people who have come out of the military because of the trauma that they have suffered in the military, things that have occurred to them, being in war. Okay, Jenny tells us that's a trauma with which continues with the person. Absolutely. Okay, and Olga says that she's heard that as well. Very good. Very good. So this is something that some people have not come across. And some people have the mistaken notion that everybody suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. That is not correct. We may all suffer from post-traumatic stress, meaning that some trauma happened in our lives, and now trauma, you have to be careful on how you define the word trauma. We did that last week. A trauma is very different for different individuals. For a child, a trauma might be that they have lost their toy. That might not be important to you. That's extremely important to that child. An adult involved in a motor vehicle accident, well, that's a major trauma affecting their body, affecting their thinking, affecting their ability to get into a vehicle, that kind of thing. Yeah, Michelle tells us that it's like reliving the trauma all over again. Absolutely. Eddie says that it can be treated with medication. Absolutely. And also in group discussions. Yeah, that can also occur. Sometimes it's very necessary. It can affect the person for a number of years. Okay, and Patricia brings it down to the point of it being unable to recover from an event in your life. Okay, that's good. So what we're going to try to talk about is how a person can recover from a traumatic event in their life. So I see that you guys are all making comments. Fantastic. Thank you. Please do not respond to each other in the post. Just keep it focused on what we are talking about, because from the way I see it, all the comments keep going sideways. So just respond to whatever I'm asking you. So yes, everybody is correct here. And we do need to understand that all of us are probably suffering from post-traumatic stress. But not all of us are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. This is something that a person can be diagnosed with, but it is not something that generally all of us are suffering from. Uba tells us that she has counseled victims of different crimes and wars, etc. Absolutely. And when you come across a person that has the disorder, there are some telltale signs of this. So let's do a little bit of background. A lot of the information I got here is from Michael Lyles, a psychiatrist, and he's talking about the symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this is what he explains. It is an anxiety disorder that occurs after exposure to a traumatic event, which triggers memories of the event and is characterized by intense fear, helplessness, and horror. So these are some of the things that the person may be experiencing: fear, helplessness, and horror. In other words, what occurs is that the individual was unable to do anything at that moment regarding what was happening to them. So it's a big deal. So again, that's why we cannot say that everybody is suffering from this, because although we all have suffered trauma in our lives, most of us have not suffered the trauma of being bombed, or of being raped, or of being traumatized in a motor vehicle accident. Most of us have not. Now, with all respect, some of us have. So I understand that. And so again, we have to be cautious in how we talk about these things, because not everybody's suffering from the same thing. Hey, Ashley, good to see you there. So now, I just said that it was an anxiety disorder. In some of the more current literature, PTSD may be being removed as an anxiety disorder and standing on its own. Okay, but that's for further reading. You can look into that yourself, because it has become a disorder that many people are suffering from, and so there's a lot of literature being written about it. So what occurs? Well, the person has a memory of the event, so that they were exposed to whatever the traumatic event was, whatever it was, right? And then it triggers memories of that event. And of course, they begin to feel the same fear, the same helplessness, and the same horror that they felt when the event was occurring. Now, if you can imagine that, that means that they can become incapacitated even though they're no longer suffering from that event. So this is why we have to differentiate post-traumatic stress from post-traumatic stress disorder. Most of us are living with post-traumatic stress from the pandemic, yet we are all able to function. You're able to go to work. You're able to take care of your daily duties. You're able to do the things that you need to do. You can get dressed and you can go outside and you can eat and you can do all of those things. Individuals suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder may be unable to do some of those things. So we need to understand that. Okay, 25 to 30% of victims of significant trauma develop PTSD. So that's a pretty big number. 25 to 30% of victims of significant trauma develop PTSD. So there's that number is pretty big. The lifetime prevalence of PTSD in the United States, not in the whole world, in the United States, is about 8%. That is about 5 million people. So think about 5 million people. That's a pretty massive number. So keep that in mind. A lot of people are suffering from this, and keep in mind that a lot of people are suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and are not being treated, or maybe ashamed. We're going to talk about that in a little while. Maybe ashamed or maybe unable to get treatment for whatever reason. So we have to understand that kind of thing. And as Eddie mentioned to us, this is the number of combat veterans. About 50% of combat veterans, meaning those that have actually gone into combat, have PTSD. And it is twice as common in women due to sexual trauma. So keep that in mind. For women that have been sexually violated, PTSD is a big deal in their life. So this is why we need to be gentle and serious about this topic, because people are suffering as a result of having suffered whatever the trauma is. Now, the trauma can occur from witnessing or experiencing a traumatic event. So we have that. Jenny, I don't believe there's any mild PTSD, as far as I know. It's just PTSD. Trauma can occur from witnessing or experiencing a traumatic event. So it's not just that you went through it. It could be someone that you're close to went through it, and now you are affected from that. Or trying to help someone deal with a traumatic event. So you're working with somebody, or you're trying to help somebody deal with a traumatic event, and then you become traumatized as a result of the trauma that they suffered. This is something that can occur to therapists. And this is why we need to be careful with our self-care. And we need to be aware of the things that trigger us or that bother us. There may be some individuals that you cannot hear their stories because it brings up something that occurred to you. And there's nothing wrong with that. That means that you need to refer that person to somebody else. Risk for PTSD varies, of course, with the severity, duration, and the experience of the trauma, how they experienced the trauma. Some of the traumatic events can include a natural disaster, meaning a tornado, an earthquake, a tsunami. That's a natural disaster. An automobile accident, and that's a big deal. Automobile accidents are high on the list of causes for PTSD. Rape or sexual molestation, an airplane crash, torture for those that have been in combat, physical assault, a terrorist attack, or witnessing the death of another person. All of those are traumatic situations. Now, keep in mind, we may have gone through some of those things and not developed PTSD. Not everybody that goes through any of these things is going to develop PTSD. Only some individuals. And be careful about saying they're weaker individuals. No, that has nothing to do with that. It simply has to do with the fact that for whatever reason, at that moment, they were affected by that trauma more than somebody else was affected by that trauma. Yeah, Eddie, exactly. That's a good example. The World Trade Center terrorist attack. You called it a collapse, but this is what it was. Many people were affected by that. Now, in the past, PTSD, that term was not known. That's a relatively new term, came out, I believe, in the 80s. But PTSD during the Civil War, I don't think anybody online here was alive during the Civil War. If you were, don't tell me. But during the Civil War, PTSD, they would call it heart irritability. That's the term that they had for that thing, for some people that were affected or traumatized by what was happening during the war. Then during World War One, it was called shell shock. And then during World War II, it was called combat neurosis or operational fatigue. And then, as a result of Vietnam, and many people coming back from Vietnam, PTSD was defined in the 1980s. That's when they really began narrowing down what the soldiers were feeling, what they were experiencing. They were coming back from war, having all of these situations, and they began to narrow it down exactly what it looked like. So PTSD symptoms, they usually begin within 3 months of the trauma, usually, not all the time, but it can begin years later. Person could be fine for many years, and then something brings back to their mind something that they suffered, and they begin having all of the symptoms. It occurs for longer than a month. If it's less than a month, it's called something else, which we're going to come to, and it keeps a person from living a normal life. It actually stops them from being able to function in society in a good way, in a healthy manner. So we got to keep that in mind. Now, some diagnostic criteria. This is just, now of course I'm speaking in generalities. If you take a look, I don't know how well you're able to see, this is one of the books that I use in counseling. Let me see if I can get it in the camera. This one specifically is the Crisis Counseling and Traumatic Events Treatment Planner. So you can see it there, and this one is linked with the DSM-5, which is very helpful. It has a lot of treatments for people who are suffering from a variety of traumatic situations. So that one's very helpful in counseling. And then here, even though this one has a humorous title, this other book is very helpful in helping people to understand how to deal with stress. This one is called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a little comical, but it's very serious in what it talks about, how to deal with stress. Why zebras don't get ulcers. So you can look back on the video later on and get the information on more information on those books. So, diagnosing PTSD, all right? So first of all, we need to understand that it begins because of exposure to some traumatic event. And during that traumatic event, this is what may have happened. The person experienced, witnessed, or was confronted with an event that involved actual or threatened death or injury, or a threat to the physical integrity of themselves or other individuals. So they could have seen someone else being victimized, and they were traumatized by what they saw. And that's normal, especially if it's a relative, someone close to them that was hurt. Secondly, the person's response, the way they responded to the event, was they had intense fear. They were helpless. At that moment, they were unable to do anything. And they were horrified. In other words, it was more than being scared. You know, you get scared, somebody jumps out at you, or on Halloween, someone wears a mask, you get scared. No, they were horrified. In other words, the fear that they felt was so great that at that moment they were unable to do anything. And Eddie brings out a good point. He says a lot of ex-military guys I know, when a car backfires, they turn white, scared, looking around, ready to duck. That's real, and it's interesting because that's real in terms of those who have come back from the military. But that's also real for people who have been raised in inner city areas where there have been a lot of gunfights. They know when bullets start flying, they need to duck. So it's interesting that it occurs in all of those, or in those two particular situations. So we're doing the diagnosing now. Also, the person repeatedly thinks about the trauma. They cannot get out of their head what it was that occurred to them. So they think about the trauma, and the trauma is persistently relived in at least one of these ways. So they're not only thinking about it, they are having flashbacks. They're living that trauma over and over and over again. So what does that mean? Well, they have recurrent, meaning that's often, upsetting, right? It takes them out of their normal way of thinking. Intrusive memories. In other words, the memory comes back at whatever moment. They could be going about their business and that memory pops into their head. So that's just one effect of the trauma. So it's recurrent, upsetting, and intrusive. They may also have recurrent, upsetting dreams. So they're not really resting at night because they are remembering in their dreams the event. They're unable then, their body is unable to relax because all the chemicals are flowing through their body even while they should be resting. So they wake up exhausted. That's another thing. They can be acting or feeling as if the event is occurring right now. Like Eddie said, a car backfires, and what happens? The veteran jumps because he thinks he has to run and hide. They are acting as if right now that event is occurring. They have intense psychological, meaning in the brain, or physiological, their body is affected, distress with exposure to internal, on the inside, or external triggers of the event. So what happens? Their mind is altered as they begin to think of the event in whatever way, and their body is altered by whatever the event was. Yeah, and Eliana tells us some may experience triggered memories by certain smells as well. Absolutely. Think about a Vietnam vet that had to be in the jungles or in those kinds of things. The smells of the plants, of what was going on, all of those things can trigger a memory of what they were going through at that time. And if it's bad enough, they will at that moment actually relive that event. So I know this is very difficult for people who have been victimized. So I get it, but this is a real thing. And you and I may be working with people who have been victimized in some fashion. And this is why we need to begin to understand how this PTSD can affect somebody. So they may be thinking about the event, they may be feeling the event, and it could be internal or external triggers, whatever it is. They hear a sound, or as Eliana says, they smell something, and now they're reliving that particular event. We're still diagnosing. They are going to be, in general, avoiding reminders of the trauma. They are going to try to stay away from anything that has to do with a memory of the trauma. Now think about it. If a car backfiring makes somebody remember when they were in combat, when you're walking down the street, how many cars do we hear backfiring or people racing their engines? Quite a few. So this may stop an individual from leaving their house. So it's affecting their ability to have a job, their ability to go out and learn something, a trade or whatever. So it's stopping them from living their life normally. They can also be self-numbing. What does that mean? Self-medication, getting drunk, using other substances so that they can no longer feel what it is. They may begin to feel detached. They may have a persistent sense of doom. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. They keep thinking that way. And their body begins to respond to what their brain is saying. Yeah, Eddie, that's a good point. They may stop from socializing because they may not know how to be around other individuals. They feel that they're going to be inappropriate, so they might as well not go anywhere with other individuals. These people, those that are beginning to have or are having PTSD, they are constantly alert or on guard. It is hard for them. It is very difficult for them to come down. They're on the alert, always looking around. Where is the danger coming from? We have to be aware of that. And they also may have these things that persist and increase their arousal. Makes it hard for them to come down. But now these things were not present before the trauma. So we need to understand that. They may have difficulty falling or staying asleep. They may be irritable or have anger outbursts, difficulty concentrating, hypervigilant, we just mentioned, and they also may have an exaggerated startle response. Anything, and woof, they jump up. So those are just some of the things that we need to understand regarding individuals that have or are beginning to show the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So anybody have anything else that they want to add regarding that, regarding PTSD? Some of the diagnoses or some of the things that you may have noticed on some individuals that have suffered some trauma? Yeah, very good. Ricky says, they may even engage in high risk or self-harming behaviors as a means of trying to relive and overcome the trauma. Absolutely. So this is a person who's not afraid of going into places where other people might be afraid of. And it's not necessary. It's not necessarily that they're not scared, but they're so traumatized by what occurred to them that it's almost as if they don't care if they die when they go into that situation. And so again, we have to be aware of that type of thing. Making the diagnosis, we're still talking about diagnosing here. The symptoms are going to last for more than a month, and the symptoms were not present prior to the trauma. Eddie asks, can divorce cause PTSD? Unlikely unless there was severe trauma in the divorce, meaning that there was some type of trauma affecting the person, such as they were going to get killed, domestic violence situation, that kind of thing. What can happen is that the person has other things going on in their lives, and the divorce or other situations affect them negatively together with the other things that they suffered. So it's cumulative. It can add, but I don't think that on its own is going to cause that. The symptoms are going to last for more than a month, and again, they were not present prior to the trauma. And Eileen says a good point here. Some experience memory loss, such as dissociation. Absolutely. And we're going to come to that in a little bit. Symptoms cause clinically significant distress. In other words, they are unable to function in society as would a normal person function in society. They have impairment in social, occupational, or other areas of functioning. All of those things are being affected. Definitely, Lorena tells us domestic violence, definitely. And especially if it's a long-term domestic violence situation, the person has developed a means of protecting themselves by using all of these symptoms sometimes to protect themselves when they were being attacked, and later on they continue to come out. So it may be difficult for the person to develop a relationship later on. Now, Jenny made a comment about mild PTSD. I don't believe there's anything mild PTSD, but there's something called acute stress disorder, which is most of the symptoms that we spoke about here, but they last for less than a month. So you were in a, God forbid, one of us was in a motor vehicle accident, and for 3 weeks we had nightmares. We were sweating. We relived the accident. We dreamt about it. We couldn't get in a car. But then after that, we were able to go back into a car. We stopped dreaming about it. We think about it sometimes, but it's not stopping us from going to work. So that would be acute stress disorder. ACUTE, stress disorder. And then there's acute PTSD, which is the same as everything that we read here, but that one lasts less than 3 months. So acute stress is less than a month. Acute PTSD is less than 3 months. Then we have chronic PTSD, lasts 3 months or more. The person may be living with this for years and years and years and years and years, and they may not even know that they have what we're calling PTSD here. There's also something called delayed onset PTSD, which occurs 6 or more months after the traumatic event. So the traumatic event happened last year. They're not even remembering some of the things about the traumatic event. Then all of a sudden, something happens to somebody else, and everything comes flooding back to them, and they begin reliving that, and now they have all of the symptoms of PTSD. So there's a few things going on here. Now, some of the difficulties in diagnosing PTSD. And this is why, again, we have to be gentle and go slowly with an individual that we are seeking to diagnose or that we're working with. Sometimes a patient does not link their symptoms with the trauma. They may not understand that something that is affecting their mind could come out in their body. So let's say whatever the trauma was, whatever it was, they begin having problems vomiting, for example, or problems with their bowels, or a lot of gastric disturbances. So all of those things are related to the trauma that occurred to them, but they don't understand the relationship between those things. So again, the patient does not link their symptoms with trauma. Number two, we're talking about diagnostic difficulties here. The person does not want to talk about the traumatic event. You cannot, and as a good counselor, you're not going to try to force somebody to talk about a traumatic event. However, we do know that there is healing in confession. What does that mean? In letting go of that thing that is bothering them, there could be healing in that. But it cannot be a forced healing. You got to be very careful about trying to push somebody to heal, because you can further hurt that person. It is at that person's pace. Now, you can coach, you can help, you can try to get them to talk about it, but careful and gentle, because you're going to have to deal with the person all messed up if you're doing too much pushing there. Yeah. Garnetta's telling us, I know Hester is telling us, the body's reacting on its own, and you do have to meet the person where they are at. And that's really, really important. You're not going to take them somewhere else if you don't meet them where they're at first. And you got to keep this in mind. You might think you're doing very well with a person. If you're the one doing all the talking, back up a little bit, because you may have overpowered that individual and they're no longer responding. You think you're doing good, and really you're just talking to yourself at that point, because now they may have disassociated from the counseling session because you kept on going. Keep that in mind as you work with other individuals. Again, more diagnostic difficulties. There might be other symptoms or problems that demand more attention at the moment than them being concerned about having PTSD. There may be a family demands. There may be other situations that are bothering them. There may be situations with resources. So we have to be careful about that. Oh, and Pora asked a good question. What if the trauma was never addressed? So what happens if a trauma is never addressed? The person can't heal. That's it. Nothing ever comes out of that. That person continues to suffer, and very often the people around them also suffer. And sometimes, another diagnostic difficulty, the person is only focusing on the physical symptoms. They're not interested in focusing on anything else. They just want a cure for the here and now thing that is bothering them. And that's a real thing. So again, you're not going to force a person to get psychological treatment if they're only focused on physical treatment at the moment. What I would suggest is get them the physical treatment, and they may then pursue the psychological treatment. Okay, so some challenges regarding PTSD. Yeah, and Thorea also tells us that other psychosocial stressors could impact the patient's progress. Absolutely. The person may need to go to work and have difficulty in going to work. They may have family stressors. They may have children. They may have parents. They have a lot of things going on in their lives. And so they feel so pressured that they really, at the moment, may not even be so concerned about themselves because they're worried about the people around them. Yeah, that's a difficulty. and that could happen to any of us. So some of the challenges with PTSD is the guilt and the shame that surrounds them having been victimized. Now, that's not so much in terms of war. You went to war, and the things that happen in war. But what the people, a veteran might feel guilty or ashamed of is how they are responding to what they suffer. Because you think about it, you think about this image of a strong individual goes out to war, they can take it, but the reality is that they're suffering very often. They're suffering on the inside. Now, of course, I cannot generalize. Not everybody that went to war has this. That's known, but some people develop it, and they're guilty and ashamed because they'll be told, "Well, you know what? You got to take it like a man, or you got to deal with it, or you got to take care of your business and forget about everything else." That's easier said than done when you feel like you're getting beat up constantly on the inside by your thinking, or by your dreaming, or by how your body's reacting to all of these things. So guilt and shame are some challenges. Then there are self-destructive or impulsive behaviors. What are self-destructive behaviors? Drinking till you can't stand anymore. You don't even know where you're at. And then even worse, drinking and then driving. Terrible. Using other substances. We know all the substances here. Now, and it's not always illegal substances. A person may take medication more than they're supposed to take the medication. That's a big deal. So we have to be careful about that. It's not always illegal things. Wow, Eddie says that. Eddie is a Vietnam veteran. He says, when I came back from Vietnam, the one thing that hurt me with people calling me baby killer for the bombing. Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal. And that's something to keep in mind. All of us sometimes are insensitive, especially when we're not in favor of a political situation. So we have to be more understanding of people who have been thrust into situations that they had no reason to be into. I remember my father talking to me. My father, born and raised in Puerto Rico, when he was about 17 or 18, they began drafting people, and he says that people left and never came back. And I have uncles and relatives that served in World War II, served in Korea, served in Vietnam, and some just didn't come back. So that was a big deal. It was not their choice. They were drafted. They were forced to go. We need to be sensitive to those situations. People who have been victimized because someone decided they needed to go somewhere else. So keep that in mind also. So we said guilt and shame, self-destructive, impulsive behaviors, some of the challenges. There could also be the feeling of constantly being threatened. Excuse me. A feeling of being ineffective. Like, I'm no good. I can't do anything with my life. I never get anything right. A feeling of despair or hopelessness. Feeling hostile. Everybody's against me, so I'm going to be against everybody else. You get that kind of attitude. So having hostility or personality change. Loss of previously sustained beliefs. For example, where was God? Why didn't God stop this? Why didn't God help me? Why is God not healing me? So the person at one time may have had faith, and they may begin to lose their faith because of what they're suffering, or because of the suffering that they saw. There could be social withdrawal, impaired relationships, and Eileen mentioned it before, dissociative symptoms. The person kind of gets lost. They could be talking to you, next thing you know, they're somewhere else. And then, of course, somatic symptoms. Their body reacts to what was going on, and they're not even aware that the body's reacting to that. And then there are some conditions that coexist with PTSD. So there was a study, it's called the National Comorbidity Survey, and they found that 88.3% of men and 79% of women with PTSD have at least one other psychiatric problem. Usually, the one that is highest on the list is depression. But for others, it would be anxiety. And then you can add some others. And they continue to say that 59% of men and 44% of women meet the criteria for 3 or more psychiatric disorders. Could you imagine having PTSD and having an anxiety disorder and having a substance abuse disorder and having bipolar disorder all at the same time? That's big. If you're going to work with somebody in that situation, you better be ready for that kind of thing. And we are, in as much as we get ourselves ready. Yeah, it's dual diagnosis times 2. So keep that in mind. People are suffering in different ways. And some of the coexisting disorders, which I already mentioned, depression, alcohol, substance abuse, phobias, social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder. So all of these things can come together and it's a mess. So we got to be ready to help the person that is suffering from all of these things. And then the course of PTSD, how it works itself out. The duration of the symptoms are affected by the intensity, the duration, the subjective interpretation, how the person views what they're suffering with, and the proximity of the trauma. Were they the ones traumatized, or was it someone close to them being traumatized? The symptoms can come and go. It's not that the person is suffering from this every minute of every day, but it could come and go. They have some statistics here. The average duration of a treated patient, 36 months, so about 3 years. The average duration of a person suffering with PTSD, untreated, 64 months. That's almost twice the amount of the person who is treated. So either way, it's quite a length of time to help a person to overcome this. The person that I mentioned, Michael Lyles, a psychiatrist, he says that more than 1/3 of the people suffering from PTSD, they don't recover. That doesn't mean that they're unable to function in their lives. It just means that they live with the symptoms throughout their lifetime. That's a big deal. And about 50% with treatment can recover within the first 3 months. So what does that say about you and I being available to give treatment to these individuals? That means that we have to be available. Now, that also means that you and I have to study. We have to be prepared to go beyond ourselves, to be stretched in areas in which we may not be accustomed, because you and I may come across someone suffering from this. So don't think that this is just the person that came back from war that is being affected by this. We said it before. It is a person that has been violated, a woman who has been raped, a child who has been abused throughout their childhood can suffer from PTSD, even though it's probably going to be diagnosed when they are an adult. They may not even be aware of that. Keep this in mind. When a child suffers throughout their childhood, they may not know that it is not normal to not be beat by their parents. Keep that in your minds. They may not understand that. So you and I are in a position to help individuals that have lived lives that are abnormal their entire life. And we have to give them some sense of normalcy. Not always easy. So just keep that in mind. So that's a lot about diagnosing and talking about PTSD, the criteria, some difficulties, the challenges, coexisting conditions, and the course of it. Now let's talk about, in the last 15 minutes, healthy coping strategies for PTSD. So before we go there, any questions or comments pertinent to what I just spoke about? I'll give you a moment to respond. Questions or comments on what we just spoke about in general? I'll give you a moment to respond. Any questions or comments? Okay, Eddie says it's insightful. Thank you. It's a lot of info. What I'm giving you guys is just an overview. There's a lot of material on this. Take a look later on. You review the video. Take a look at the books that I showed you, a lot of good stuff there. So let's get into some, and I'm making sure that I word this correctly. Not just coping strategies, but healthy coping strategies. Okay, Eliana tells us that PTSD can also be experienced by those who were incarcerated. Absolutely. Absolutely. What goes on in prisons is not a good thing. It's really not a good thing. Eddie says VA hospitals have to do better, and you well know because you use those hospitals. Absolutely, they have to do better, and this has been an ongoing problem. And Teraya tells us there's a lot to digest. Oh, it sure is. Get some stomach upset from all this material here. So, healthy coping strategies. Number one, if you're working with a person that has PTSD, or you think you may have not necessarily PTSD, but you might have some of the things that I spoke about, well, you have to gently and sensitively explore the person's recollection of the facts of the traumatic incident and their emotional reactions at the time that it occurred. What does that mean? You have to help the person to be able to talk about the situation. If not, they're going to continue to relive it in different ways. In other words, I said it before, it is a form of confession. It is a regurgitation of the negativity that one time entered inside of them, and you're going to help them get it out. That can happen in one session, that can happen in 3 sessions, that can happen in 10 sessions. But you are helping the person to take out from inside of them what they have internalized. So you're helping them to let go of those things, what they suffered, what they remembered, and what they felt at the time of whatever the traumatic situation was. And that can get heavy. So just keep that in mind. Secondly, you want to help the person to verbalize an accurate understanding of PTSD, not things that they read in the media or things that are made up. No, an accurate understanding of what PTSD is, how daily functioning has been established by the symptoms of the PTSD, and explain that the reactions being experienced are normal responses to abnormal events. This is important. We have to normalize for the individual what it is that they are suffering because they already feel that they are living in an abnormal situation. We cannot add to that feeling of abnormality by making a big deal out of what they're suffering. No, we want them to understand that their body, that their brain, that their inability to sleep, that their nightmares are normal reactions to events that are out of the norm. So it is we then have to understand what we are talking about to help them to understand those things. Number 3, we're going to explore the person's schema and self-talk. So what is their diagram of living? What's the narrative? How do they speak to themselves? What is their worldview? Is everybody against them? Is there any hope? Do they hate life? What are they talking about? What are they thinking about? You have to explore with that person how they are thinking at the moment, how they are living. What do they think about the situations around them, world events, so that you get an idea of how their brain functions. Once you do that, you're going to have a greater understanding of that person in particular. So explore them, their self-talk, and I'm going to read this exactly as I wrote it here. Explore the person's schema and self-talk that mediates trauma-related fears. How do they deal with fear as a result of the trauma that they suffered? Do they talk about, I deserved it? Do they talk about, wow, everything bad happens to me? Do they talk about, oh, you know what? And this might be a little bit healthier. I was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. That's actually a little bit healthier because they're beginning to understand that they were victimized, that this was not something that they deserved to happen to them. So you got to keep these things in mind. And it goes on. Challenge. Now here, this is what counselors sometimes don't like to do. We need to challenge negative biases and assist the individual in generating appraisals that correct for the biases and build confidence. In other words, we got to let them know, no, the person who victimized them, if that was the situation, they were looking for someone to victimize. You happened to be the person to walk in that direction on that day. We have to let them know it wasn't that they singled you out. They were looking for somebody. You happened to be the person that was there at that moment. So, okay, so what we're trying to do is challenge the negative biases, challenge the victim mentality, challenge the idea of only bad things happen to me. That's not true, because bad things are not happening to you every single day. Yes, they may happen to you on some days. And this situation was an especially terrible situation, but it's not happening to you every day. So you got to challenge that. And while you're doing that, you're letting them know this is not something that's happening to you on a normal everyday basis. This was a one-time event. So you got to correct for those biases and then help them to develop some confidence as they begin to acknowledge that, yeah, that's true. It's not happening to me every day. Number 4, you can teach what's called thought stopping, in which they internally voice the word stop, S-T-O-P, stop, just stop. They voice that word internally, and they imagine something representing the concept of stopping, such as a stop sign or maybe a red stoplight. When the negative thought comes, they think of a red light, stop, or they think of a stop sign. Immediately, when they start noticing that these negative, unwanted thoughts are coming in, I do that. When I'm in a funk and I'm thinking a bit negatively, I'm like, stop. This is not every day. This is today. Why are you thinking like that? Or this was for 5 minutes. Or you're only stuck in traffic for 2 minutes. Sometimes what I do, let's say when I'm going to work and I see traffic is backed up, I actually have done this. I will count how long I was stuck in traffic. And believe it or not, usually it's 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. It's not so long. But if I stay there and I stew and I start getting angry because I'm stuck in traffic, it seems like a much longer time. So keep that in mind. But anyway, teach thought stopping. They can literally say the word out loud, stop. Actually, quite recently, a person came to speak to me, and we practiced that. And they literally held their head in their hand and thought the thought and then said stop. And they practiced it. So this is something you might have to do. Number 5, develop and reinforce a routine of physical exercise for the person as a way of them managing their body and releasing pent-up energy. This is an area in which most of us are at fault, even with our own bodies. We don't exercise. And all that junk that comes in, including the junk that comes into our minds, is never released. Sometimes you got to work up a good sweat. Get on that treadmill. Go do some kind of exercise. Go do something that doesn't take a lot of thought, but is repetitive motion, and you can release a lot of things that are inside of you. But remember, you're going to help the person develop a routine of physical exercise as a way of them taking control of their body. Maybe once upon a time they were victimized and someone else took control of their body. You're going to teach them you can now control your body. Nobody else needs to control your body. And you help them develop whatever kind of exercise regimen it might be. Good for them and good for you. Number 6, identify with the person individuals that are going to offer support in times of distress. Very often a person will come and they'll tell you, I don't have anybody. I don't have anybody. I have nobody. But then as you begin to explore with them who they have, well, they have sisters and they have brothers. They may have their mom. They may have their dad. They may have cousins. They may have people that they were in contact with and they lost contact with. And perhaps in speaking about it, they can begin to have contact again with some individuals. And of course, they have you, but they don't have you 24/7. And I don't encourage that either, that they would have you 24/7, because that's not realistic. Remember boundaries. We've spoken about that in the past. You can be available, but you can't be available all day, every day. Got to be careful with that kind of thing. So develop with the person a list of people that they can count on you for a certain amount of time, but besides you. And finally, and now you guys can tell me some of the things that you think might be helpful for the individual. Finally, I put in my list here, identify and participate in a ritual that reinforces putting the traumatic event in the past. Whatever that might look like. That's going to look different for different individuals. Maybe someone that hurt them is no longer alive. Well, you and that person can sit down and they can have a conversation with that individual, even though that individual is not there. You set up a chair and you act like that person is there, and they say whatever they need to say to that person and put that to rest. Or there could be other rituals. Maybe someone that has been in a motor vehicle accident and they're concerned about driving. Hey, you know what? You expose them to a racetrack and you go with them to the racetrack and you watch the cars racing around. That's going to heighten the way they feel. But as they see that in most races cars don't crash, that also might be helpful to them and bolster their confidence. So I'm going to stop and you tell me, what ways do you think a person can help somebody as a healthy coping strategy that is dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder? What do you think? Helping people deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, what do you think? How would you help somebody in that situation? And you probably have helped and not even aware that they were suffering with some of these things. Oh, okay, Eddie says you can become a soundboard for them. That's excellent. Yes, they can bounce things off of you. That's good. Not everybody wants to be counseled. Sometimes they just need to talk. So that's important. That's excellent. Absolutely. Okay, Eileen says encouraging them to write a letter to a fake friend experiencing the same situation. They often learn they can think clearly through the problem. Okay, very good. Now I know what you mean by a fake friend, even though that sounds kind of weird. So to an anonymous individual experiencing the same situation. Okay, excellent. Because they're helping that person, and in helping that person, they're actually helping themselves. Very good. That's almost the same as self-talk. Okay, Michelle says journaling. Journaling can be excellent for those that like writing. That'd be fantastic. Oh, Jenny says inviting them to a day at the gym. That's nice. And let's say there's some gym you have to pay to go to. I know that for those who live in Co-op City, I don't know if they still have them, but they have these little areas around there where people can do different exercises. So that's helpful. Just going out with the individual or to a track. Eliana says There could be some somatic practices. So somatic is the body, dealing with the body. Somatic practices such as diaphragmatic breathing to help them establish a feeling of safety. Very good. So this is where you are going to help them to learn how to breathe in a better fashion, so they don't hyperventilate or that kind of thing. Very nice. Jenny says a free pass. I guess talking about a gym. That's important. That's very, very important. So, hey Chris, I didn't know you were there. My good buddy Chris here. I was at 9/11. What can I do? What do you mean? What can you do? You got to explain that a little further. What do you mean? What can you do? To help somebody else or to help yourself? What do you mean by that? Okay, Melody says meditation. That's a person certainly can meditate. For those that have that kind of mindset that they can be quiet for some time. Something that I do is that I put music, comforting music, and just chill. Dima says friendship, just showing that you care. That's important. Sometimes, as Eddie said before, sometimes the person just wants to know that someone is available. Okay. Vincent says that he cries at stories about it. Well, then, Chris, that means that you and I got to get together at some point. That's what that means. We ain't going to do it here, but we certainly can get together and talk. I'm available to you. So, anything else? What else can we do in helping a person dealing with PTSD? And we're going to call that night. It's 8:02. So I know I went over by 2 minutes. I apologize. I think I did start at 7:01 though. So I'm 1 minute over. And just keep in mind, Vincent, that there's nothing wrong in crying. I have certainly cried at some of the situations in the current world and other things that I have heard of or suffered. Nothing wrong with that. That's a good release also. But it's not preventing you from living your life, so that's important. So there's not too much more coming forth. Thank you guys for being here. Next week will be our last session for a time. Please feel free to message me on Facebook. You see I'm there quite often posting funny things. And give me ideas for what other stuff we can talk about at some future point. Reach out, say hi, and I will be seeing you guys next week. Have a blessed night. Thank you for being here. Either tomorrow or on the weekend. This will be up on YouTube, on Open Door Ministries channel. Please like and subscribe. Spread it to other individuals so that they can be helpful, get helped by this. And if this was helpful to you, let me know. So God bless you all. Have a good night, and I will see you all again next week. Hey, Reza, good to see you there. I will see you all next week. Have a blessed night.